Hey there, and welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've got quite a stack of material here, articles, reports from international bodies, and they're all focused on, well, the really urgent humanitarian crisis happening in Gaza right now and what the UN and other groups are trying to do about it. Our aim with this deep dive is to sort through all this info, pull out the really key points, understand the challenges, the calls for action, and really get a sense of what it means for the people actually living through this. Basically, cutting through the noise so you can get up to speed on a very complex situation fast. And joining me is our expert guide for today, someone who's really skilled at breaking down these complex international crises into, well, understandable insights. Great to have you here to help us unpack this.
Thanks for having me. It's crucial we look closely at these details right now.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's dive right in. Based on the sources we have in front of us, what are they telling us? What's the immediate reality on the ground in Gaza look like?
Well, the sources paint a picture of just profound and widespread distress. What jumps out immediately is the scale of displacement. We're talking over 90% of the population forced from their homes.
Over 90%.
Yes, it's an almost unimaginable level of upheaval. And then compounding that, you have this dire food situation. The reports state that more than 96% of people are experiencing what's termed acute food insecurity.
Wow.
Which means, basically, they don't have consistent access to enough food. It's leading to hunger, malnutrition, just on a massive scale.
96% facing acute food insecurity. I mean, that number alone is just staggering. It suggests basic survival is the daily struggle for almost everyone.
Precisely. And then look at the health infrastructure. It's barely functioning. The sources suggest only 17 out of 36 hospitals are even partially operational.
Only 17.
Partially. And add to that, there's a severe scarcity of clean water. Combine that with extreme overcrowding in, temporary shelters, and it's leading to a rapid spread of infectious diseases. So the overall picture from these reports is one of, well, catastrophic need across almost every single sector.
Okay, given those devastating numbers, it just begs the question, why isn't aid getting to people effectively? What are the main obstacles these sources are highlighting?
The material is quite explicit about the barriers. A primary issue that comes up again and again is the Israeli blockade, which severely restricts the volume and, importantly, the type of essential supplies allowed into Gaza.
Right, the blockade.
But it's a multi-layered problem. The sources also mention the extensive damage to Gaza's infrastructure. Roads, communication networks, warehouses. They're damaged or destroyed, making distribution incredibly difficult once aid is inside.
Makes sense.
And of course, the ongoing hostilities themselves, they create immense security risks for aid workers, for the convoys trying to move. The sources also detail, very specifically, significant bureaucratic hurdles.
Ah, the red tape.
Exactly. Aid convoys facing multiple inspections, unpredictable delays, often for items agencies say are critical, but might be deemed dual use.
Okay.
They also highlight a really significant reduction in the number of aid trucks getting through crossings like Rafah compared to before the conflict, even though the need is obviously much, much higher now.
So it's a combination of factors then. Physical destruction, active conflict, administrative barriers, all creating this bottleneck.
That's it precisely. It's not just about getting aid to the border. The sources reveal it's an immense, complex challenge getting it past the border and then distributed internally amidst all the chaos and danger.
So the amount getting through is just nowhere near enough.
Exactly. Sources consistently show it's just a mere fraction of what's actually required to meet the overwhelming needs we were just discussing.
Right. This brings us to the UN's role then, which is mentioned a lot in these sources. What is the UN pushing for? Based on these reports, what are their specific demands, their calls to action?
The UN's position, as it's laid out in the sources, is very clear and, frankly, urgent. They're pressing hard for immediate, unimpeded humanitarian access. That means getting essentials like food, water, medicine, and fuel in without hindrance.
Unimpeded access. Okay.
Yes, and a consistent demand is for safe, secure corridors, places where aid workers and convoys can actually move freely and safely within Gaza to reach the people who need help most.
Safe corridors, right.
That's
That
it.
seems critical.
Absolutely. And the sources also repeatedly call for removing those bureaucratic impediments we talked about, streamlining inspections, allowing more trucks in, making the process predictable. And there's that really powerful quote that stood out. Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he's quoted directly describing the aid getting in as a fraction of what's needed.
A fraction.
Yes, and he starkly contrasts that with the ocean of need on the ground.
Ocean of need versus a fraction of aid. Wow, that really paints a picture of the gap they're trying to address. So how's the international community responding to these urgent UN calls, according to the sources?
Well, the sources seem to indicate a, let's say, mixed response.
Yeah.
There have definitely been expressions of concern, pledges for more financial contributions from different countries, and, ongoing diplomatic talks aimed at trying to smooth the way for aid and find some kind of resolution.
But
But the reports, taken together, kind of imply that while there's attention and some increased support, it hasn't really translated yet into action on the scale needed to fundamentally change the situation. It's not yet matching that ocean of need the UN described.
okay, all right, here's where it gets, well, incredibly impactful, I think. Beyond the big numbers, the statistics, what do these sources tell us about the daily lives, the human stories of individuals and families in Gaza?
Yeah, the sources do try to move beyond just the data. They describe this constant, exhausting struggle for families just to find enough food, find clean water, just to survive day to day.
Just the basic.
The absolute basics. They mentioned seeing children who are visibly suffering from severe malnutrition, from dehydration. It's a direct result of that acute food insecurity we mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and the lack of functioning health care. It means that things that might normally be treatable injuries or illnesses, they can become life-threatening because the supplies, the facilities, they just aren't there. And perhaps the most heart-wrenching part is the immense psychological toll detailed in these reports.
I can only imagine.
Widespread trauma is reported, stemming from, relentless bombardments, being displaced again and again, the grief of losing homes, jobs, loved ones.
Yeah.
It's a population enduring not just physical hardship, but deep, deep emotional scarring.
Is there any mention in the sources about efforts to address that huge psychological trauma?
Yes, the reports do acknowledge attempts by organizations. UNRWA is specifically mentioned trying to provide psychosocial support, especially for children, who've witnessed just unimaginable things.
That must be so difficult.
Incredibly.
Yeah.
But the sources are also very clear about the severe limitations these efforts face. The sheer scale of the trauma just dwarfs the available resources and the number of trained people. Plus, the ongoing conflict makes it incredibly hard to even implement these vital programs consistently or safely.
Right, right. So let's maybe shift focus slightly to those organizations that are actually on the ground trying to help. How do our sources portray what it's like for them working in this incredibly dangerous environment?
The sources consistently highlight the dedication, the bravery of staff from numerous organizations, both international and local. They're working tirelessly, often at significant personal risk. They're operating under all those constraints we've discussed, the restricted access, the damaged infrastructure, direct threats to their safety.
It sounds almost impossible.
It's incredibly challenging. But despite these huge obstacles, the reports do confirm that these agencies are still delivering aid. They're setting up temporary distribution points, providing limited services whenever and wherever conditions allow them to.
So they are making some difference where possible.
Yes, absolutely. But they all echo the same point. To move from this kind of emergency, almost piecemeal delivery to a response that actually meets the scale of the need,
Right.
that requires fundamental changes.
Which are?
Specifically, a sustained ceasefire and guaranteed, safe, unimpeded access. That comes up again and again.
So what do the sources suggest needs to happen for these organizations to work more effectively? To scale up?
The reports offer some clear recommendations drawn from what they're seeing on the ground. Number one is prioritizing the safety and security of aid workers. They have to be protected.
Absolutely.
Then, streamlining those bureaucratic processes we talked about for aid entry, for movement within Gaza that's essential to speed things up. Establishing secure corridors, maybe internationally monitored ones, specifically for humanitarian movement. That's seen as critical. And fundamentally, they need increased consistent funding and stronger international political backing to empower them to actually mount a response that's proportionate to this crisis.
Okay. So bringing this all together then, based on the picture painted by all these sources, what's the path forward? What are the key actions needed to start alleviating this crisis?
The path forward, as it's outlined pretty explicitly across these materials, involves both immediate steps and longer-term ones. The most urgent call, echoed everywhere, is for an immediate ceasefire.
A ceasefire first.
Yes. The sources consistently argue that stopping the violence is the absolute prerequisite. It's needed to enable humanitarian access properly and, crucially, to protect civilians. Beyond that immediate step, the sources emphasize the necessity of lifting the blockade and ensuring full, unimpeded humanitarian access, not just into Gaza, but within Gaza itself, through all available entry points.
Rightful access.
Then, looking longer term, for any kind of lasting resolution that prevents this scale of crisis from happening again, the sources underscore the need for a comprehensive long-term political solution, one that addresses the root causes of the conflict and lays the groundwork for actual peace and sustainable development.
And finally, thinking about our listener, what role do these sources suggest you can play in responding to all this? What can individuals do?
The sources do touch on that. They suggest, supporting reputable humanitarian organizations, the ones actually working on the ground in Gaza. That's a direct way to help provide relief.
Okay, supporting organizations.
Yes. And they also highlight the importance of raising awareness, sharing accurate information about how severe the crisis is, and advocating for policy changes, maybe engaging with elected officials or joining campaigns calling for humanitarian access, for a ceasefire, for that political resolution we talked about. The underlying message across these sources, really, it comes through in various ways, is that every bit of support matters. Every voice raised, one source even put it as every action counts towards alleviating the immense suffering.
Every action counts.
That's a powerful thought to end on. So we've taken this deep dive into the sources today. We've unpacked the, frankly, harrowing reality on the ground, the specific obstacles blocking aid that are documented, the UN's very clear urgent calls for unimpeded access and a ceasefire,
Right.
the crucial steps needed both now and for the future. And importantly, what the sources suggest individuals like you can do. Maybe as you reflect on that image of an ocean of need from the Secretary General and this idea that every action counts, consider how awareness, how individual advocacy might just help bridge that huge gap between the scale of suffering and the possibility of aid actually reaching those who desperately need it. It's something to think about. Thank you so much for sharing.